Good morning, student. I am Ashish Kumar, and now I am going to discuss in the series of the Indian hidden history. Everyone should know. I am going to discuss the most important topic, and this is the most confusing topic of the Indian history. This is the doctrine of the lapse policies. So actually, the doctrine of lapse policies. This doctrine of lapse policies, this it was a policy of the East India Company to annex the Hindu native states in the British Indian Empire. When the East India Company came in India, he adopted the different policies to the annexation of the Hindu state in the British Indian Empire. He followed the policy of the war, followed the subsidiary alliance policies, which was introduced by Lord Wellesley. And the climax of the annexation of the British policies, the British Indian Empire of the Hindu state, was the doctrine of lapse policy, which was introduced by the Lord Dalhousie. ये लॉर्ड डलहौजी की डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ द लैप्स पॉलिसीज, ये क्लाइमैक्स है ब्रिटिश इंडियन एम्पायर में एनेक्सेशन का ऑफ द हिंदू स्टेट्स. सो बिफोर टू डिस्कस द डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स पॉलिसी, वी शुड नो कि अगर हम ब्रिटिश ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी ने किसी हिंदू स्टेट का एनेक्सेशन किया, उसके एनेक्सेशन में किन किन चीजों का एनेक्सेशन हुआ. सो व्हेन द डलहौजी केम इन इंडिया, so he introduced, and when he started the doctrine of lapse policies, so firstly I am going to discuss what was the law to annex these policies. He said, if a Hindu state, if any Hindu state and his king was died without any male biological successor, so this state were annexed by the East India Company. It was introduced by the Dalhousie in the doctrine of lapse policy. But we should know कि अगर हम डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स पॉलिसी करते हैं या ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी ने डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स पॉलिसी किया, तो उसने किन प्रॉपर्टी को कन्फिस्केट किया. तो ही सेड only the public properties were confiscated by the East India Company, not the private properties. तो पब्लिक प्रॉपर्टी में हम किन किन चीजों को हम पब्लिक प्रॉपर्टी में डिस्कस करते हैं. तो इन द पब्लिक प्रॉपर्टीज मीन्स द किंगडम, द थ्रोन, the taxation, or you can say the revenue, the administration, these belongings were confiscated by the East India Company. This is the public property. But the private property is remained with the family of the king or the adopted son of the king. So in these public properties were confiscated. The public properties were confiscated by the king, by the East India Company. And in the private property, private property were not confiscated by the East India Company. In the private property means the first, that is the private estate of the king, the jewelries, the other belonging to of the king, these were not confiscated. And now we should know, so the doctrine of lapse policies were applied in which the native states or native Hindu states. So actually, when Dalhousie he came in India, he distinguished the different Hindu states. The first Hindu state, this is the independent Hindu state. The second Hindu state, this was the dependent Hindu state. And third Hindu state was the created Hindu state. In the independent Hindu states were those Hindu states which were existed before the East India Company. And these independent Hindu states were never accepted the suzerainty of the Delhi Sultanate, never accepted the suzerainty of the Mughals, never accepted the suzerainty of the Peshwas, so never accepted the suzerainty of the British government. So in these independent Hindu states, if the king was died without his male biological son or successor, so after the death of this king, he adopt the son. तो इनके जो ट्रेडिशनल पॉलिसीज चलती थी, जो ट्रेडिशनल रूल्स चलते थे टू अडॉप्ट द सन, वो यहां पर अप्लाई होगा इंडिपेंडेंट हिंदू स्टेट्स में. The best example of the independent Hindu states was the state of the Mysore, the state of the Hyderabad, the state of the Travancore. यहां पर किसी भी कंडीशन में डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स पॉलिसीज अप्लाई नहीं होगी. The second important things, the dependent Hindu states were those Hindu states which accepted the suzerainty of the Delhi Sultanate, accepted the suzerainty of the Mughals, suzerainty of the Peshwa. So they already accepted the suzerainty of the British East India Company. So if the king was dead without the male biological successor, so in that situation, the king, before the death, the king should take the permission to adopt the son. And if the East India Company, he did not give the permission, so in that situation, the adopted son would not be the legal successor. Means the dependent state should take the permission from the British government to adopt the son if he has no any legal successor or the biological son. So the dependent state should take the permission, and if the East India Company, he deny to adopt the son. So after death, the estate were annexed by the East India Company. Only public property. And created Hindu states. And the best example of the dependent Hindu state was the Satara, Jaipur, Nagpur, Jhansi, where the state were annexed by the British government, East India Company, during the reign of Dalhousie. And the created Hindu states were those Hindu states, those states which were created by the East India Company. So the king of this created Hindu state has no any right to take the permission from the East India Company if the king has no any legal successor or has no any biological son. So just after the death of this king, without the male successor, this area, the public properties of the created state were annexed by the British government or the East India Company. So the second number state and the third number state were annexed by the East India Company during the Doctrine of the Lapse policies. Not the entire Hindu states. This is the major confusing topic. And during Lord Dalhousie, the Awadh were annexed by the British government, by the Dalhousie. Dalhousie annexed the state of the Awadh. Awadh means the modern day Faizabad and the Lucknow region. The king Wazid Ali Shah, his son Birjis Qadir, the queen Begum Hajrat Mahal, okay, and actually the best example of this created Hindu state was Karoli. Karoli is in Rajasthan. Okay, and Begum Hajrat Mahal. But this state was annexed by the British government, East India Company, on the basis of the maladministration. Okay, so this is something about the doctrine of the lapse policies, which was the climax of the annexation of the Hindu state into the British Indian Empire. Okay, thank you.